really the philosophy that informed my work and that has always informed my activist work. And Gloria obviously came also with that same lens and kind of with those same ideas that, we needed to not only work to address the health conditions of individuals as regards the HIV/AIDS epidemic, but to also work in tandem to ensure that some of the other needs that these communities had were met. Because oftentimes it's not just our ability to address one issue. If people are hungry, they're going to turn to sex work. If people are homeless, they're going to go turn to sex work, sometimes as survival, as tools of survival. So we realized that, we couldn't be throwing buckets of water out the window, that we really needed to address, communities holistically. And so part of that work needed to happen in tandem with we're trying to mitigate and address some of the other needs that they had: lack of access to healthcare, lack of access to housing, lack of access to unemployment, especially with sexual minority communities, transgender communities, and so forth. And so eventually we began to address women's health issues and obviously trans issues and the trans program, which was getting started when I left Calais, and which Gloria took on.
That's amazing. Thank you for laying that out. And it's, as you're talking, I'm seeing like Gloria Casarez residence and kind of the legacy in the physical city today of some of these programs that I want to get into eventually. But first, Louie, I wanted to ask you, you grew up in Philly and eventually came onto the team at Galay working on the youth program. Can you talk about what it was like to work with David and Gloria in those days?
It's actually 25 years ago this July. July 8th was my first day as a Galay employee, and was kind of like pulled in by Steve Rivera, who was already a peer youth educator there at the first iteration of the youth program. It was more outward facing, more like training adults and doing presentations in schools. When Gloria came on, it was a more flushed out vision of what that youth program was, and it was called Youth Program. And that was in 1995, so it was an interesting time because it was right on the cusp of what the second wave of the AIDS epidemic was. When people think about the AIDS epidemic, they tend to think about the early 80s. And I think definitely at the onset of the epidemic, what is something that still needs to be highlighted. But I think visually and even in terms of data, like who it impacted was very different in 1981 than who it was impacting in the early 90s, right? It was very gay men centric, stealing the lives of majority gay men. That was the outward facing, but by the 90s, it was clear that it was a Black and brown issue, that it was ravaging communities, both straight and gay. So I came in at that time, right before the advent of breakthrough medication. So I can remember trainings that I was given before medications versus after. Wow. And that framed and continues to frame how I approach my work. Because when I started Galay, I was a 7th grade dropout. I don't know what David saw in me. I can remember in the interview, and he was like, "Are you in school?" And I was like, "No, why would you even ask that?" I'm out doing stuff. So I think that being given the opportunity as a 7th grade dropout, as someone who grew up with parents who struggled with addiction, but also because my parents struggled with addiction, I had this room to explore my identity in a way that a lot of my friends didn't, right? Mm-hmm. I didn't have expectations to be straight. I don't have a coming out story. It was kind of like we were so marginalized both by society and our family that the expectations were very different. So when I came on to Galay, it was pretty in concert with what my friends were, what my mom's friends were doing. They were sex workers, they were trans women, they were gender non-conforming people, even though that language wasn't around at that time. So watching people do the Midnight Cowboy Project. And I remember part of the orientation at Galets that you had to do, like, I think a week outreach. I would go out there late at night. It was very odd to start your work shift at 10 p.m. And going into the park. So that kind of, again, framed, you know, I was like 17, 18. It framed like what my adulthood would look like as a queer Latinx person, right? And also what made that time, looking back, exciting is that there were not a lot of people focusing on this community. There were not a lot of queer Latinx folks. Like, it was like finding Waldo. Like, if you went to a club and you saw another gay Latino there, you can make a clear bet that they were not from Philly. They were always from out of town. So I think when I met Gloria, it was right before I was leaving Galé, right, because the youth program was starting to gain some steam, and we had lost funding. I can't remember who. I'm not going to say any names. City agencies that give you money, they remain nameless. But David, I remember David saying, "Give me the summer, I will find money, and it would be bigger and better." But in that time, I met Gloria because she was brought on to lead a project that was supposed to be the youth center of the minority youth center of Philadelphia. And I was one of the ambassadors, and that's how I met Isis, who was still a great friend of mine, actually defended my son when we had a case that makes the world go round. But the project stalled because of politics and, you know, stuff that happens in the 90s before the advent of social media. Because I think if we had social media, then we could have definitely made our case, but people were in power back then. But me and Gloria connected. Again, there were not a lot of Latinx queers doing the work, and certainly not, and those who were doing the work, not as politically, I don't want to say progressive, but like really talking about sex in a way that wasn't demonizing. Right? And again, this is at the height of the epidemic. So some people talked about sex as something to be wary of, where David, folks at the Midnight Cowboy Project, Galé, and myself talked about it like from this very pleasure perspective, which in 1995 was like, y'all are wild, get that out of my face and don't bring that into my schools. So me and Gloria connected immediately. And then when that project fell through, I went on to work at Colors, which is the Black gay organization in Philadelphia, and it still had strong ties to Galé, and Gloria came on board as the youth coordinator of reaching adolescents via education. So we kind of like developed professionally in that kind of way, but also still very connected to Galé. Like Galé was part of the genesis of our work. Like it was an introduction, like what thinking outside the box in terms of what HIV as a social justice issue can look like. And, you know, and I would eventually wind up coming back to Galé under Gloria's leadership. You know, she brought me back in the winter of 1999. I remember because I bought Mariah Carey's Rainbow.
Wow.
The same week that I started. It was in November. And we just stayed friends throughout that time, eventually became roommates with her. And just developed as adults in that kind of way, but still staying connected to the work that bonded us, that introduced us. And, you know, as I grew up, you know, she grew up. And, you know, I've always looked to her and David Acosta as mentors. And I think when people hear mentors, they think adult and young person. It wasn't necessarily like that for me. It was kind of like, I was this North Philly kid who was a 7th grade dropout and had everything set up against him. But the mere introductions to both Galé, Gloria, and David, like really shifted the trajectory of my life. And that continued. And even when I began to do Gravarones, you know, almost 6 years ago, I went back and I was like, you know, David, I need you to be a part of this. Gloria, I need some technical support. Like, what is this idea? Help me draw it out. I knew that I wanted to do storytelling, but did not know that was a thing. So I had to go back to the people I trusted. Like, it felt like I was stepping out on my own. Like, you know, like it wasn't a project that wasn't connected to an organization. It was a project that I was doing, you know, independently. And, you know, and even as the project grows, I'm always thinking about the connections I had to Gloria in terms of even of a historical context. Like it's the foundation of, you know, Gran Varones, which amplifies the stories of queer Latinx folks, to talk about and raise the histories that are not often told on Apple documentaries, right? And a lot of those histories are localized. A lot of those histories make way or help to create national movements. And I think the work of Galay and Gloria are a part of that. And it, you know, it is definitely my mission to continue to elevate that, because it, not to be dramatic, saved my life. And I know what that kind of work can do. And I know what that kind of legacy means. And I know what it can mean for other young people to hear that, so that they can step into that kind of very visionary approach and begin to be mentors and support mechanisms of themselves. And one song, you know, when we were talking earlier, that reminds me of Gloria. I think I knew that when we were friends outside of work, because sometimes you're friends with people at work and you have to figure out, like, if I quit here, are we still gonna be friends? Gloria in 1997 was going away down south. I think she might have gotten some fellowship. I can't remember. And she had asked me to hang out. And I remember thinking, oh, because the youth center thing had fell through. It was, you know, stopped in its tracks. So, and she was just about to start Galay. So it was like this window, like the thing that introduced us no longer exists. So what does that mean for us, right? And I remember I was going to the gallery and going to the Wall, which was a record store. They were once a thing. And buying Notorious B.I.G.'s More Money, More Problems on CD single, because it had a remix. And I think it was that day when we had lunch that I knew that we would be friends for life. Because it wasn't a meeting about a project. It wasn't a meeting about an event. And it was a meeting because she wanted to touch base with me before she went down south for the summer. And I think that for definitely a kid who grew up in North Philly, who did not even know that downtown existed, to be connected to people who thought were change makers, and those change makers to think that I was a change maker, like shifted how I thought about myself. And I carry that throughout all the years that me and Gloria with friends. And I often say that it's weird when people talk about her like she's Diana Ross. It's like being Diana Ross's child. She's your mother, right? She's someone you love, someone very ordinary. And then you go out into the world and they talk about her in this grandiose way. And it's kind of like, so it's sometimes jarring because me and Gloria were like family. And to hear about her impact when in 1995, we weren't even sure what we were doing. We know that we had to do something. But to talk about that work almost a quarter of a century later is still disorienting to me. Because I don't think that any of us thought that we were doing anything particularly magical, as much as we were doing something in order for our communities to survive. So, you know, I'm like so proud to be part of that history. I'm proud to talk about Gloria because, you know, before the Gravarones kicked off, you know, she helped us come up with Our Legacy is Alive. You know, she helped me figure out what the logo was going to be. And there was no credit, right? Like, it's not something that you do, like, let me post on Facebook, because that's what we did in 1995, and it's what we did in 2014. So I hope that people know that about her, know that about her legacy. It's connected to other legacies. And the mural that exists, I think, encompasses that. And if people go to the mural and see all, they can see all of the legacies that Gloria is connected to, and all of the brilliant people that were connected to Gloria, and those histories that continue to shape the city, that continue to shape the LGBT community, and the legacies that continue to inspire folks like myself.
Mm, yeah, that's beautiful. And it's a great transition to talking about how Gloria is monumentalized in the city. And so how people will meet her as we wander about or, take tours as Beyond the Bell does. And so, David, I wondered, you were on the committee for making the mural happen right as Gloria passed away in 2014. And I wondered if you could talk about that process of choosing Michelle to be the artist and working with her on the commission.
Right. So yeah, there were several people on the committee. Louie was on the committee as well as some other folks, Trisha and others. And so we basically, the Mural Arts Program has a process that they follow. They put out an RFP, a call for a mural for mural artists, and then designs of a mural. And then those come in and then they are reviewed by the committee. And in this case, a lot of the folks were folks who knew Gloria and who had done work with Gloria throughout several facets of her life and her activist life. And I think that, we also judge the proposals based on the strength of the idea of the work presented. Obviously, that has a lot of weight when you are trying to decide a mural, especially a mural that I think is meant to convey the presence of someone and the history of someone. And but I also knew that Gloria had admired and was a big fan of Michelle's work and Michelle's murals, other murals that Michelle had done. And so I think that that certainly bore some weight on our decisions to finally do that. But we also liked Michelle's approach to blending these very activist facets of Gloria's life into the mural so that people could understand it without necessarily having a narrative. It was a pictorial narrative. Later on, I would come to understand that there were other interesting connections between Michelle and Gloria, which I will let Michelle talk about. But it was great when those things came to light because we kind of realized that we actually had made, the best decision possible to have Michelle be the artist that would work on Gloria's mural.
So Michelle, can you tell us about those connections that later David and others learned about and we learned about from you the other day?
Yeah, first of all, to do the Gloria Casarez mural and to honor Gloria was just so amazing. And I felt that through the mural process, I knew Gloria in passing because there were several connections that way before even the mural concept happened, before she, was the liaison in City Hall, like way before all that happened. I found out through just talking with family and friends through this process that my parents actually knew some of her family. One of them being, I live in South Philadelphia where there were very few, we could count on our hand how many Latino families we could count on our hand, right? And so when my parents arrived, my father's from Puerto Rico, my mother's from Colombia, they both arrived at different points in Philadelphia, but they had a mutual family friend. His name was Don Pedro Cardenas, and Don Pedro, who we would call Don Pedro, would be kind of our grandfather, right? So he actually walked my mom down the aisle when they were married at La Milagrosa, which was the Spanish chapel on 19th and Spring Garden that unfortunately is no longer there, but there's so much history and connection there. That's where my parents were, they met in one of the events of La Milagrosa. They were married. I was baptized there. I was married there. And also Gloria's family has a very long connection along with that history of La Milagrosa. So it was really interesting was to really find those connections as I was learning more about her beyond her work as an activist, in our city. So for me, it was during the time that I was asked to see if I was interested in doing the mural. I'd just given birth to my son, and I was telling Louie that Gran Varones and my son were birthed at the same time. And so I was a new mom, and I was also launching a very, ambitious project that I'm still continuing to work on, which was called My Familias Separadas Project, which is around the stories of detention, how families are affected by detention, deportation. And I was starting to do that here in Philadelphia due to the high number of deportations that were happening nationwide, but also how our communities, specifically in the focus of the project is with Latinx communities and undocumented families, were targeted in my own neighborhood. And so it was definitely a huge risk in a sense of creatively of approaching installations, approaching installations that were not in a traditional mural form. And so it was during this time that, here I am launching this off. I have, just have a newborn, infant, learning how to be a new mom and managing this work. And so, to do this honor for Gloria it was such an honor for me. And I was like, well, I can't say no. So how can I make this happen? So when I was approached, I actually remember calling one of my, lead assistants, Brianna Dawkins. So hopefully she's watching. I want to give a shout out to her. So Brianna was a student of mine way back in mural corps. She was 13 and has been one of my lead assistants. I won't say how old she is now because then that would make me a lot older. But she was my right hand. And so I said to her, if you're able to help me through this process, I was creating the design, but also just the actual painting and implementation of the mural, then I said, I can say yes. And so she said yes. We had an amazing team. And that's how we were able to accomplish the mural. Yeah, and I think, the timing was mostly the biggest thing, but I also felt that for me, and why I said yes, obviously, like for me, Gloria continues to be such an amazing force of energy, right, in terms of the work that she has done. And I see all of the extensions of this work in David and Louie and all of the people that she's connected with. But I also felt a lot of pride as honoring a woman of color, honoring someone that one of the phrases that I never forget that Trisha Dressel, her wife, had shared with me was that, she always said, you never negotiate against yourself. So you never negotiate against yourself. And so it's one of those things that I hold on to, especially when I find myself trying to defend the integrity of the work that I'm doing in communities. And even with Gloria's story and Gloria's mural, how important it was not to just have the pristine photo of her, right, in her suit and jacket, but the mural itself has the images of her with the bullhorn and leading the Philadelphia Dyke March. And what I really love about the mural too is that, yes, and so that we have that image there. There's the Kensington Welfare Rights Union. Harvey Finkel, who's an amazing photographer, was the one who took the photo of the two little girls in the bottom. And what was great is when we finished the mural, the girls were actually able to see themselves depicted in the mural. And so I felt that it was really important to show the actions of Gloria, right? So not just all of the work that she did in City Hall, but all of the work she did in our neighborhoods, in our streets, with our families, with people directly. It's so important to capture that. And I think that, you know, when we think about people, honoring people that have been, you know, really just, and I want to, you know, people will interpret radical in so many different ways. But I just feel that even by what Louie was sharing, like, you know, the way of thinking and moving forward and just kind of like breaking these stereotypes and finding new ways to really meet people where they are to help them is radical. And I felt that it was very important not to whitewash Gloria's history. It was really important to really capture within the wall space that I had the essence of who she really was in all of these situations. You know, the mural wraps around the little alleyway, which is now called the Gloria Casarez alley. And in that little alleyway, there's these images of her and her family, like her, I believe, great-grandfather, her aunts are depicted in one of the leaves. She is also shown in one of the images, one of her favorite picture of her as a little girl wearing, I believe, a Wonder Woman outfit on roller skates. And so there goes Brianna. And so the leaves on the far end really depict all of those different images that were really photos of, I think it was a passport of her grandfather that Gloria would hold really dear to. And so what the idea was that those leaves would be really the connection to the leaves that you see behind her and her like official portrait. But it also goes to say, like, for folks that are out in the public, or, you know, again, as Louie was saying, you know, Diana Ross, or like this whole idea of like concept of like Gloria, but really, when we think about work as activists and the work that we do, it is all coming from our own direct personal experiences, right? It is coming from whether we found moments of joy or inspiration in the most darkest moments, right? Or there's this urgency of change to say, I don't want this to happen to someone again, right? And so what do I need to do? What is the world that I want to create? And so I felt that it was really necessary to incorporate those leaves. And the leaves were also inspired by, because Gloria also did some printmaking. So she actually did this like really, I believe it's like one of her favorite patterns. So I would ask her wife, Trisha, like all of these different questions and some of these personal things that the family knows, but we're incorporating in the design to really represent the essence of Gloria. I think one of the images too is of her, the Phillies game, and she was pitching the ball. So you got a cool image of her with her Phillies shirt in the background. So that's kind of a little nook that still exists there.
Yeah, I love that part of the mural that wraps around in the alley. It's just beautiful. And you get the sense that these images are there for a deeper purpose, you know, it just resonates. It feels like I'm getting to know her on the block. And it's, yeah, I love that. One other piece that I wanted to talk about, we have a couple of questions from people who are watching, but I wanted to talk about that portion of the mural that said love knows no boundaries, and also the Philadelphia Dyke March portion, to talk about some of the challenges you faced when trying to represent the history of Gloria's work on the side of a building.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when we think about public space, and I think the challenge as a muralist or as an artist working in public space, and something as, you know, it's not really necessarily permanent. We want the mural to stay there as long as possible, but there is a sense of permanence to a mural. So that means many voices are involved, different points of, different voices from the community are involved in that process. And so that makes it really difficult. So when I say those words, like, Gloria's words of, don't negotiate against yourself. Like, that was really true in this process because, there were, even though there was this huge banner that says Philadelphia Dyke March, there were some issues in terms of different opinions of how the word dyke would be represented in the mural, how her work in around issues around poverty, and the Kensington Welfare Rights Union also, sparked some concern. And then Love Knows No Boundaries, it actually said Queer Love Knows No Boundaries. That was the actual original poster that was in the photograph from one of the many photos that I used as references for the mural. Actually, one of the murals on top next to the window you can't see is from Gran Marones that we utilized for the mural. And so it's one of those things where, for me personally, being respectful, knowing that there's only so much I know about the LGBTQ community and how people identify or don't identify, and I would also, ask questions like, ask questions, especially around the word queer, right? Because that was like painted and then taken off and painted again and taken off. So poor Brianna went through that process. And for me, I felt like, well, if this is a symbol, a sign that someone is holding, then that's true to that experience. It's true to that person's truth. So why would it be an issue on the mural? So there were some things that I felt really surprised by because, and I shared this in our conversation, my perception from, I would say, outside looking in to the LGBTQ community was that people, there weren't any kind of conflicts or constraints and then I told Louie and David, I was like, I don't know why the hell I thought that, but it became more evident when I was painting the mural. But I feel that it's also people's opinions and reflections are a reflection of why Gloria was doing the work that she was doing, why folks like David and Louie still continue to do this work. It's just a reflection that there's still a lot more work that needs to be done, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, it was challenging to kind of navigate through that, especially since I felt that it really wasn't necessarily in my place to say, well, this is what queer is, right? So just being really mindful of that, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think too is that how people react to the mural, like I feel it's really important for an image of Gloria, what she represents, who she is, what she's done, what the people that she's connected with to continue to do, that she is represented in the neighborhood, that someone that is a woman, a person of color, a person that has a long legacy with Philadelphia, right? And her family's history within our city. And the work that she did, it's important for that to exist and for us to honor her in the truest way possible through that work.
Yeah, that was beautiful. And I wanted to just unpack the word queer a little bit because that's one thing we can do in this conversation that you can't do on a mural. And we have David here who was an ACT UP activist. And so I wanted to ask you, David, what the word queer meant in your activism work with ACT UP.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the word was coming out of just kind of this zeitgeist of queer culture that was certainly in the air. Two groups that kind of arose simultaneously during the 80s were obviously ACT UP, but also Queer Nation. And Queer Nation focused its work on visibility. And so some of the things we would do is we would go to like straight restaurants and we'd walk in and sit down, and then when someone gave the key word, we would kiss and people would just lose it.
Wow.
But part of what we were doing was we were taking back some of these heterosexual spaces and queering them. And so I think the word was also pretty much in vogue because there were a lot of individuals coming out of universities doing queer studies, queer theory.
Mm-hmm.
And so the word was in vogue at that time. And I think for a generation of younger LGBTQ folks, it resonated with us. It was also a word that had been used pejoratively to denigrate gay people, gay and lesbian people. And so we felt that by taking the word and reclaiming it, we took out the sting of it, or the sting of what it historically had meant. And so very much like a previous generation had reclaimed to some degree the word faggot, which obviously was also a denigrating and a derogatory word, but which some male queer communities took back as a symbol of empowerment. So I think that was where the word, and the word continues to have a level of controversy in communities. And I always tell people, people have the right to call themselves and their communities how they feel they can identify best with that. And so I know that there continue to be tensions around the use of the word, specifically within different generations. But I think for my generation on down, I think the word is pretty much a word that's going to stay, and which people use without any of the baggage that was associated with it previously.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and important one about the shift in the use of the word for younger generations like myself who embrace the word queer as a shift in, remembering the legacy of what came before, like reclaiming not only for yourself as an activist, but for your future generations of people to be able to grow up with dignity as a queer person and not have that word be weaponized against you. And so I think it's a great point. So we had a question from Bob Skiba at the William Way Center.
Oh,
Hey, Bob.
Everyone says hi, Bob. Bob says hi. He asks, what will happen to the mural if the building is raised or developed? So
yeah.
Michelle, this one to you.
So yes. So when we talk about what's been done already, so once I heard that the 12th Street Gym was purchased, the folks that it was sold to and it will be developed by Midtown developers. And so I then stressed my concern to Jane Golden from the Mural Arts program. The mural was painted in 2015, so it hasn't been, around long enough to even, just be where it is and live there. So I immediately contacted Jane. We then had a conversation about how important it is to keep the mural where it is. It was also very challenging trying to find the right location. So the fact that we were able to land at 12th Street Gym was a huge accomplishment. And none of us were expecting that the building was going to be sold. The way that murals work is that, in most cases, if you're a property owner, we come into an agreement with the property owner and the mural stays in that property for the length of time that the property owner is there. When the property owner leaves, then it's basically figuring out a new agreement with the new owner. In this case, what's great is that Jane from the Mural Arts program was able to connect with the Midtown developers. And also part of that conversation was also with reaching out to Representative Brian Sims to stress to him the importance of keeping Gloria's mural where it is and intact. I'm still not clear on what the plans are for Midtown, if those walls will just remain the same and the shell remains the same, but everything inside will change, or if there are plans to completely take down that building, which means that the mural will also come down with the walls. And so my proposal, which I've been very clear in expressing this with Mural Arts and also the Midtown developers and Representative Brian Sims, is that the mural stays where it is. And so challenging the developers to think of a design that incorporates the mural, incorporates, if that means me repainting the mural on a new wall, but still with the very same elements that we have in there, then I'm more than willing to do that, because I feel that it's necessary and important for Gloria to remain where she is. The other huge part of this is that, and this came out in an article, Midtown has offered $25,000 to help with the repainting of the mural, but there's no guarantee that the mural will be in that specific location. And so my response to the developers, which for the folks that are developers that are listening, is that, when we think about our city, and this is happening citywide, not just with the Gloria mural, people are attracted to specific communities. People are attracted to the essence and the character and the aesthetic of that community, which includes the murals. And so if we call ourselves a city of murals, even though we are facing huge budget cuts for arts and culture in our city, then how do our actions reflect that, right? So how are we supporting and funding, our communities, but how are we maintaining and preserving these spaces, right? When we think about a mural, I tell people it's much more than paint. It is the process that we went through. So I think of the meetings and the conversations, the photographs I went through, the people that would come on the street and say, thank you for honoring her. Thank you. I see myself in this work of art, right? And it just makes the hairs on my arms stand up, because it's so much more than just a painting, right? And so what I'm really thankful for is pushing, that conversation, which again, I'm very thankful also for Jane and the developers who are listening, right? And so it's just a matter of continuing to push that the ideal situation, which is keeping Gloria where she is, and utilizing our resources to make sure that something as iconic as this mural, and as more importantly Gloria's legacy is still there. The other huge part about it is that if I'm not mistaken, there's going to be a state plaque, historical plaque, that will be placed at that actual site. And it is the first historical plaque dedicated to a Latina in all of the state of Pennsylvania.
Wow.
So Gloria still continues to just break boundaries, right? In that sense, I can't believe that this will be the first one, but I think that when we recognize, when we're thinking about public spaces, how we claim public space, who it is that we honor, what are the spaces that we feel that our own history, our own identity is being reflected, especially in spaces when we don't feel always represented. It's so important to keep that true. So the conversation still continues, along with Mural Arts, with Representative Brian Sims, with the Midtown developers. Obviously everything's on stop with the quarantine, but what I've done is just shared with Joey is just a link that people can share their information if they want to receive updates on what's happening with the mural. And so it'll just be kind of like an email list. And I've also included a little comment box of why you feel it's important to keep the mural where it is. I think I'm, just kind of like what Louie was saying is we're in a world where we can utilize social media to where we can connect people, garner the support that we need. And so other than just Gloria's family and friends that have always shown support, trying to really get as many people on board to really make sure that we can keep her where she is and that we continue to honor her in that way.
Wow, thank you. And I did just post the link to that sign up in the comments if you're watching and you want to keep updated on what we need to do to save the mural, or what the updates are. You can sign up there. The other thing, just to wrap up the conversation, is, you know, when we were talking last time and earlier today, it really made me think about the moment we're in and how the inequalities that you, David, Louie, and Michelle have fought for over the past decades are coming up again and again. And we have opportunities to name where injustice is happening and fight for rights, for human rights. And so I wanted to end with a way that people can engage and support communities now who are being adversely affected in COVID. And so Michelle has found some community members who are doing great work in Kensington, which is where Gloria grew up, and also in South Philly. And David also mentioned Juntos.
Yes.
And so if you want to make a donation to any of these causes, you can tip the Beyond the Bell Tours Venmo, and I will split the tips between the three sources that Michelle knows and David knows, so that it's going directly to the people. We're obviously not going to take any of the money. And so that's a way that you can engage if you have the means to today. Okay. Thank you all for coming and being part of this conversation. I did record it, so I'm going to upload it to YouTube. And it was amazing. And thank you for honoring Gloria in your life and your work.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Joey.
All right.
Thank you, Louie and David.
Thank you, Michelle.
Cuídense.
We didn't